Most every day, I have the most wonderful opportunity. Of course, I'm being a little silly here. That opportunity is I get to behold my face in a mirror. Have to shave, right? Have to get cleaned up and do that. And contrary to my joking, I don't spend all of that time saying words like, "My, what a handsome devil you are." But as that grooming goes on, we have two fixtures in our bathroom, and one light fixture has three separate bulbs, and the other one has a different style of lighting that's maybe a little bit more fluorescent or such. And so lots of lights, big mirror, and every day I stare at that. And of course, after shaving, and then you take the washcloth and wipe everything off, you kind of look in the mirror to make sure you've got everything and it looks good, and off to work you go. And then nature eventually has its way where I will, at work, need to use the restroom at work, which has fluorescent lighting. It's a different kind of lighting and such. And they have strategically placed this full-length mirror that you will approach as you head towards the door, so you can get one last good look to make sure everything is in place. And I can't tell you how many times as I have walked up to that mirror and looked, that I will see something like, growing out of my ear that's this long, that for days I have not been able to see, and it's like, how is it that I have missed that? And then, of course, I'm self-conscious the rest of the day at work until I get home, get back and stand in the mirror at home, and then you don't see it, right? It's like, now where? It was somewhere over here. Drives us crazy, but a different light sometimes shows different things. I remember taking a course through Spring Arbor, and we had to kind of do a mock little business and a mock business plan, and the guy I was with happened to have a history in forming like a janitorial service. And so might as well grab the low-hanging fruit, right? So we designed a janitorial business because he already knew about it. And one of the things that we did as our presentation was we walked through that building and we showed them things that weren't clean at all, which also included the ultraviolet light that when you shine it in a bathroom and you think it's nice and clean and you see what shows up in that. We did such a good job with our presentation. We got an A on it. And the owner of the building got several complaints about how unclean the building was. And we were kind of chastised for how good our presentation was. But again, it was a different set of eyes. It was a different view. It was a different light. We had a very long reading today from John chapter 9, which is a story of a man who was born blind and then receives his sight. And there are many, many interesting things that we can comment on in the course of those 41 verses. And thankfully, Richard and Carolyn have said, since it's their last Sunday, I can go extra long because you get your time in. So one of the first things that I think is important is when people pointed at that blind individual and said, who sinned that this person was born blind? And we still sometimes have the same theology that runs through our world, that when we see somebody suffering a misfortune, we think that there is a sin or something that has happened to explain that. And there is, like the series goes, half-truths. There is a half-truth, perhaps, to that. If I do something really dumb and sinful, I'm probably going to have consequences of that. If I rob a bank, I shouldn't find it terribly surprised to find myself in an orange jumpsuit and visiting, a place with iron bars. Obviously, there's an impact in that. Obviously, if I engage in risky behavior and contract some kind of a disease from that, certainly that is to be expected as a consequence of those decisions that I made. But that is where the truth ends. Jesus is saying that, the parents didn't sin here, and that the individual didn't sin. This person was just born blind. Unfortunately, people then have drawn about the theological conclusion that this person was personally born blind so that the miracles of God could be shown. That God purposely made them blind so that somewhere down the line Jesus could come and heal them. I don't like that theology either. I think what Jesus is saying is simply here's a blind person and here's an opportunity to show the works of God. Let's seize that opportunity. And I think that is a wonderful approach that the Christian church and that we as servants of Christ should take anytime that we see a situation like where somebody is in need of ministry. Rather than spending a great deal of theological time trying to figure out who's to blame and whether or not we should serve, we should instead say, here's an opportunity to bring forth the love and the grace and the healing touch of God for the glory of God. But we, all too many times, as a Christian church, as followers of Christ, instead like to get caught up in the same things of the Pharisees. Here, a very miracle has happened right in front of them, and they are wound up of, is this of God or is this not of God? And they question him. One of my favorite lines in the whole thing, and it's kind of a subtle thing of humor that's put into the scriptures, is they ask this individual, well, where is Jesus now? Well, how would he know? He was blind when Jesus was in front of him. And then he went and washed. But he undergoes this significant amount of interrogation. And the Pharisees cannot grasp that this is something from God. This is a very interesting pause for me to interject this. Our first reading in Lent had to do with Nicodemus coming by in the darkness to talk to Jesus. And they end up talking about birth, and he is thinking physical birth, and we find out that it's spiritual birth. Last week we talked about the woman at the well, and here, instead of a meeting at night, we have a meeting in broad daylight. And what begins is this conversation about water and thirst becomes a much deeper conversation about receiving the eternal life of Jesus Christ and having the wellspring of joy flow from us, from the life that he gives us, far greater than that. And now, in today's reading, we have people thinking just in terms what begins as something of just, blind and physical sight being restored. Jesus says, oh no, this is a much bigger picture. This is spiritual blindness versus spiritual vision. And it is that very thought that we need to ask ourselves continuously. Are we blind to the work of God that is going on before us? Are we blind? What are our blind spots to the work of God? Years ago, there was in Battle Creek the attempt to bring about a citywide evangelistic meeting with a speaker by the name of Clyde Dupin. I had never heard of him before. Quite frankly, I've never heard of him since. But he built himself as, or presented himself as, I'm like a Billy Graham, but I go to smaller places where Billy Graham can't go to. And I'll preach the gospel, and churches, would you please join in with me, because I can't do this alone. I need churches to help. Do you know there were many churches that wouldn't join in and help with that evangelistic campaign? Because this group of churches doesn't like this group of churches. That's a spiritual blindness. That is a blind spot that we have. If time and technology had allowed it, I would have shown you a video that lasts no more than 2 minutes. And the video says, this is your job. Count how many times the people in the white jerseys pass the basketball to each other. And then the video begins, and there are 3 people in white jerseys, and there are 3 people in dark jerseys, and they're kind of doing this rotation, and they're flowing through, and in the midst of that, they're throwing this basketball, and I got all the way through the video, and I went, they passed it 13 times. The video said wrong. They passed it 15 times. I'm like, boy, I thought I saw that. And then it said, oh, by the way, did you see the gorilla? Gorilla? And then it rewound the tape. And in the midst of these people passing, a person walks through in a gorilla suit, stares at the camera, goes just like this, and walks off the screen. And I never saw it. And I thought, well, is that me? So I sent it to Roger. He didn't see it either. So aren't you relieved to know that 2 people who sit up front, that's the power of our observation? But if you look that up on YouTube, you will find that very, very easy to miss the gorilla as it walks through. I'd like to challenge us, as I kind of bring this into a close, is to humble ourselves before God and to say, what are the blind spots that keep us, that keep me, that keep us from ministering and reaching people for Jesus Christ? Is that a bias against race, religion? Is that a bias on sexual orientation? Is that a bias on income level? Or is it even something perhaps like a bias of church service and order of service and order of music? This past week I had the opportunity to attend a seminar where the speaker came from Chicago, and they specialize in church restarts, of where they have 25 different locations, and they're booming, and they have about 7,000 people flow through in a month's time between all of those. And they teach their people that we are to plant new churches. We are to grow. We are to expand. We are to do, and that's exactly what they've been doing. And what will happen is a congregation will approach this organization and say, we need a restart. We have a 600-seat auditorium, and there's 22 people here. Can you help us? And it will be in a part of Chicago that that has a very large population, and maybe between all of those 25 congregations, there's a whole bunch of people that actually live there, and 40 or 50 people will raise their hand and will say, we'll go to that church, and we'll plug in, and we'll give that a restart. But, there's always a but, right? There'll be a change in the service. The music might be more contemporary than what you're used to. And one of the pastors shared, and they said, somebody came up to him and said, I am sick and tired of this 7-Eleven music. He's like, I don't follow that. And they said, you're singing 7 words over 11 times. But he said, you had 44 people, 22 people, you now have like 300. Are you willing to make that change to reach more people? These are the things that we as Christians are always called to be flexible and to recognize the opportunities that we have to minister and to be willing to do what needs to be done to minister to those people. Whether it's crossing cultural boundaries, which oftentimes we don't think of as much now, but in the 60s that was a big deal for people to minister across different racial boundaries. We have that opportunity. We may have that opportunity. We may have a different opportunity in ministry. But just because we have an opportunity doesn't mean that we'll be successful at it the way we are. We may need to adapt to that opportunity. And we need to be willing to let Jesus open our eyes to whatever blind spots we may have that keep us from sharing the love of God freely to each and every individual that we come to. I get so annoyed at Christian denominations that for whatever reason want to withhold Jesus. We are called to freely receive and to freely share the life and the grace that God gives us. And we must be willing to do that on God's terms and not